For the past few decades, divorce rates in America have been falling. But when you break it down by age, you notice something strange. For most age groups, divorces keep ticking downward. But for people over the age of 65, they're skyrocketing. Since 1990, the divorce rate for elderly Americans has roughly tripled. Today, 1 in 10 new divorces are between senior citizens. And if you look at anyone over 50, they now make up 40% of all divorces. So what's actually going on here? And how does our society change when a generation of older people suddenly starts living alone?
Marriage is no longer till death do us part. Marriages today may not be that much more unhappy than they were a generation or two ago, but rather our expectations have shifted, and women and men alike are not willing to remain in these empty shell marriages anymore.
Okay, so the obvious question is why? What's going on? I realize that the studies are not giving us a conclusive answer on this, but you must, in all of your work that you've done, and you are the expert on grey divorce, what are people saying to you? What are you speculating?
I think there are a number of factors that are at play here. First, we'd want to think about the changing norms surrounding marriage and divorce. We've got a high bar for what constitutes marital success. People don't want to remain in empty shell marriages, those marriages in which they're not particularly happy, but they feel they can't leave. And instead, particularly as we've seen rising levels of female labor force participation, lengthening life expectancies, if you reach age 65, you can expect to live another 20 years. And that's a long time to spend with someone if you're not feeling committed to them anymore. And what we're finding is a lot of older adults, it's not a precipitating event. Rather, they'll tell you that they've grown apart from their spouse.
Any divorce is sad. And an uptick in divorce amongst older people does seem to be on the face of it sad. And we can dig into the problems surrounding it later in the outcomes. But is there, in some ways, a good news story for this, particularly in what it tells us about women and their own financial independence? This is not an option that has been available to women, or particularly to older women, decades and centuries ago, but now is.
That's right. Baby boomers are the first generation for whom the vast majority of wives were in the labor force, and therefore they've got the economic independence to leave an unhappy marriage.
So what are the outcomes of these grey divorces? And maybe you could break that down a bit between men and women.
What our research has shown is that there are challenges for women and men alike. Adjusting to divorce is challenging, regardless of whether you've initiated the divorce or you're the one who is left holding the bag and being told that their spouse no longer wants to be married to them. And what we're finding for older adults is that it takes a bit longer to bounce back. So for younger people, it might take them a year or two. For older adults, it's taking on order of more like 4 years. And this is spanning the gamut in terms of whether we're talking about psychological well-being, emotional well-being, economic well-being. We can imagine that you've spent 20, 30 years accumulating your nest egg, and then when you get divorced, you're dividing it in half. And that's going to be hard to rebuild over time, especially if you're divorcing when you're on the tail end of your career. And we know that the poverty levels, for instance, are much higher for these individuals than they are for people who divorce at a younger age.
And what about the kind of emotional consequences of divorce? Does that differ by gender? I don't know, but I'm imagining that it is still easier in our society for an older man to find a new partner, perhaps even a partner who's younger, than it is an older woman. I wish it wasn't so, but it seems to be the case that it's harder for older women to find new partners. Does that make a difference to post-divorce satisfaction between men and women?
Yeah, older men are about twice as likely as older women to repartner after a grey divorce. We also want to be sensitive to the fact that for some people, the divorce could be what we would say is endogenous. That is, that's happening because there's another partner waiting in the wings, right? But yes, for men, they're much more likely to go on to repartner, whether that's through another marriage or cohabiting with somebody.
So there are two factors here. There's the financial factor and then a loneliness factor. Mm-hmm. And I imagine if people are getting divorced and perhaps they don't have family nearby them, these things can compound pretty quickly to increase rates of depression and loneliness. Are you seeing that as well among people post-divorce in later life?
Yes, and we're seeing an interesting pattern in terms of who's most likely to repartner related to closeness to and proximity to your adult children. So for older adults, men and women alike, who either live near an adult child or have very close contact with an adult child, they're much less likely to repartner. And we can offer a couple explanations for that. On the one hand, it might be that those children are discouraging their parent from repartnering. There's some evidence for that in the European context. At the same time, though, it's also possible that there's a substitution effect going on, such that if I have a close relationship with my children, then I'm going to feel less of a need to repartner. Whereas if I don't have children nearby or who I can rely on, then I might be more motivated to go out and find myself a partner.
Can we broaden this out a little bit? Because I do keep seeing headlines, even amongst younger people, that we are seeing a world in which people are delaying marriage. Some people are staying single for longer. They are choosing to live alone. And it seems that's a sort of situation that's been on the rise for a while. So even though the divorce rate amongst younger people isn't going up, are we in a world where people of every age are deciding that partnerships are just not the default anymore in the way that perhaps they were when I was in my 20s?
Yeah, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, the retreat from marriage is widespread, and the reason why we're not seeing larger rates of divorce among younger people is because marriage has become much more selective. So for the baby boomers, the people who are in their 60s and 70s now, marriage was universal, and many of them got married. They experienced the divorce revolution of the 1970s. Let's just mention that the divorce rate peaked in 1979 in the United States, and since then it's fallen by 30%. Many of these people went on to repartner, to remarry, and that's part of why we're seeing this gray divorce revolution. It's because remarriages are at much higher risk of divorce. Young people today, what we're seeing is marriage is treated as a capstone experience, and only the most advantaged and affluent among us are entering marriage. We're doing it at later ages. We're doing it when we're more economically secure. And that is all to the benefit of promoting marital stability. But absolutely, marriage now is just one in an array of options. And I think older adults recognize this. And when they're no longer satisfied in their marriages, they're willing to call it quits.
So, Susan, to close, to somebody who might be watching this, who has a parent or who has a grandparent who is going through a divorce, what should they understand and what could they be thinking about in terms of what they should be doing to help support them?
Yeah, I think the watchword would be social support. We know that spouses tend to be the first line of defense. And when you no longer have a spouse, you're going to have to reconfigure that social support network. And it takes time to recover from divorce. As I mentioned, it can be up to 4 years for people to bounce back. But the important thing to remember is that people do recover. And so, there's certainly life after divorce.
Okay. Susan, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.